We are joined on the phone today by author Glenn Frankel. We're talking about his new book, Shooting Midnight Cowboy: Art, Sex, Loneliness, Liberation, and the Making of a Dark Classic. Hey, Glenn, how you doing today?
I'm good, Dustin. How are you?
I am excellent. Thank you so much for taking the time out with me.
Happy to do it. You've got the exact right first name to talk about Midnight Cowboy.
Yeah, there aren't a lot of Dustins out there anymore, but I'm sure a lot of them were probably named after Dustin Hoffman.
Were you?
You know, I'm not sure. I probably was. I was born in the early 80s, so I was right around that time.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a great name, but you don't see it that often.
Well, Glenn, you've got a new book out here, Shooting Midnight Cowboy: Art, Sex, Loneliness, Liberation, and the Making of a Dark Classic. Can you tell the listeners a bit about the new book?
Well, it covers this 1969 movie, Midnight Cowboy. And the book tries to do what I usually do with my movie books. I'm not just writing about the making of this really quite classic, wonderful movie, a rather bleak, dark movie in the late 60s, but also the way that movie sort of illuminates the era it was made in. I find movies are a great way to look back at the history of times. I mean, you can read a book, you can look at old newspapers, but a movie really tells you a lot. And Midnight Cowboy, set in New York in Times Square in the late 60s, tells us about both the sort of cultural changes that were going on in that era. You know, it was a movie that reflected the sort of adult themes and the changes going on, certainly in the movie business and the culture at large. And it's a beautifully acted movie, Dustin, starring Dustin Hoffman and Jon Voight, who give two of the great performances, I think, starring performances in a modern movie. It just, as I say, it's a different kind of movie. It's scary in many ways. It's bleak, but it's also funny. And I just found it a lot of fun to write about the making of the movie and the kind of people who worked on it.
Yeah, definitely a lot of stuff was going on, not with just the movie, but around that time. And, I think one of the more interesting parts of the book, you mentioned it a bit, the discussion of, kind of the changes in Hollywood as far as the production codes and, censorship and, all that stuff changing around that time.
Yeah, it's an interesting time. Hollywood's in trouble because the audiences are getting younger, and they're not so interested in those old genres or the old movie stars. And so Hollywood's setting out to find a way to reach the sort of younger audience. And the changes in the rating system, they moved from an old system that censored everything to one that allows for more adult themes. They tried to find ways through the use of music. Midnight Cowboy has a great musical score. Everybody's Talking, the song that Nielsen sings in the movie, it's a thread that runs through the movie, is a wonderful song and really embodies the spirit of it. And just the spirit of the movie itself. It's a story of a young guy who comes up from Texas thinking he's going to make a life as a male hustler in Times Square. And he quickly finds out that that's not a good business model, and he gets taken constantly by other people. And eventually he hooks up with a sort of outcast, homeless con man played by Dustin Hoffman, and together these two guys they forge a sort of partnership. They're not great friends, but they have to rely on each other to survive. So it's a movie that really speaks to many things, dark things, but also at the core of it is this human connection, and that's, I think, what makes it such a powerful film, both back then and I think it's still a lot of fun to watch it now.
Definitely, and I imagine the old Hollywood and the older actors and that kind of group there probably couldn't have foreseen how popular this movie was going to become and really how important this film has become over the years.
Nobody thought this movie was going to make a dime. Not the people who made it, not the people who financed it. They thought, well, this will be an interesting movie. These are great actors and all that, but a story of these two guys on the street in New York, there's no way. And so everybody was surprised that the movie did very, very well. But as I say, the audiences were changing. They were up for complicated movies. And Midnight Cowboy was one of the first movies in the new rating system, and it was rated X. And so, that they thought would be the kiss of death in terms of getting a big audience. But in fact, it was a bit of an attraction. It got the younger crowd. It got the counterculture crowd. The same people who had watched The Graduate and Bonnie and Clyde came to watch Midnight Cowboy. And so it was successful both critically. It won the Oscar for Best Picture. It's the only X-rated film ever to win Best Picture. But at the same time, it made good money.
So I read that it was originally rated R, but did they purposely change it to X to kind of generate maybe that extra buzz to see what it was all about?
Well, it's interesting. The X rating actually was done by the United Artists, the company that made the movie, but it wasn't so much that they thought it would be a selling point, but that the owners of United Artists were a little worried about the sex in the movie, and especially the gay sex in the movie. There are a couple of scenes. There's no romantic sex in Midnight Cowboy, and it's not like it's a dirty movie to any extent. But it was a very adult movie, and they were worried about the homosexuality. They were worried that it somehow would affect young people. Remember, this is the late 60s. It's still an era where homosexuality is looked at as some kind of disease. And so they themselves decided to restrict it to a certain age group. When it won the Best Picture, then they went back and got it re-rated R. And that's how it's rated today. But as I say, the only X-rated picture ever to win, and it reflected the mores and the prejudices of its time in that way.
Excellent. Again, author Glenn Frankel's with us. We're talking about his new book, Shooting Midnight Cowboy, Art, Sex, Loneliness, Liberation, and the Making of a Dark Classic. And Glenn, besides, the accolades and the Academy Awards, the film was really important for LGBTQ representation in the films. Definitely opened the doors, not only for movies that came after it, but probably for people, to feel more comfortable seeing it portrayed in the mainstream around that time.
Well, that's exactly right. In the late 60s is a time when these kinds of walls are starting to come down. I mean, you have off Broadway this play, The Boys in the Band, which is really about the first mainstream play that takes seriously gay characters. You've got John Schlesinger, the director. He's kind of forgotten. The British director who made Midnight Cowboy went on to make a movie called Sunday Bloody Sunday, which is about a three-way relationship between a gay doctor and his young lover, male lover, who also has a girl, a woman lover. I mean, these kinds of things are happening in movies finally. The Stonewall riots occur in 1969, just a month or so after Midnight Cowboy comes out. And so you're seeing a big cultural shift. Things have changed now. It's hard to remember how 50 years ago homophobia, even in a liberal place like New York, was the mode. Was basically and gay people were had to hide in the corners. That all changed over time, slowly but surely. But Midnight Cowboy is an important sort of beacon of what's to come.
And you mentioned the soundtrack as well. Obviously the soundtrack for Dustin Hoffman's last film, The Graduate, that definitely helped the success of that movie too. So, I'm sure at that point they're always kind of thinking, if the movie doesn't do well, maybe we'll get a song on here and we can at least make some money off of the soundtrack.
Well, that was part of their thinking for sure. Schlesinger found this song, Everybody's Talking, and he found it's a very enigmatic song. It talks about wanting to get away and being in your own head, and it fit well the main character, this cowboy named Joe Buck, who's played by Jon Voight, incidentally, in his first starring role. And the music just gives an extra dimension to things. That's what music was starting to do, and there's no question that was one of the reasons that the movie did so well. But it's got a lot of great things going on in it. It's beautifully photographed. It really captures New York in its seedy glory, I think you could say, in the late 60s. It's got wonderful costumes. The costumes that Dustin Hoffman wears is this sort of down-and-out con man. Joe Buck's cowboy hat and jacket. These are all things that the combination of things, plus the wonderful actors, not only Dustin Hoffman and Jon Voight, who I think are fantastic in the movie, and both were nominated for the Best Acting Oscar, losing out to John Wayne, incidentally, in True Grit. But the supporting cast is just fabulous. A woman named Sylvia Miles, she's got a 6-minute scene near the beginning of the movie with Jon Voight, and she got nominated for Best Supporting Actress because she's so good, so New Yorkish, so tough and mean, and yet funny in that scene. So there's a lot of things going on in Midnight Cowboy, and it really was, as you can imagine, Dustin, talking to some of these folks who were involved in it, and all of whom think it was the greatest thing they were ever involved in. That to me was interesting.
For sure. Well, I know, Glenn, the book is just out now, but is there something else you're working on, or maybe something we should be watching out for?
Oh, well, I'm working on a couple of things. The pandemic really set me back for a while because, to do these kinds of books, you want to go out to places. You want to see people in person. The Motion Picture Academy Library in L.A. has great archives, and so I've been working up a few things, but I'm not sure exactly where I'm going. First thing I'm going to do is go see my grandkids because my wife and I just got our second vaccination yesterday. So Once we get that out of the way, I'll be back to work.
Excellent. Well, again, the new book, Shooting Midnight Cowboy, is out now, and definitely, not just for fans of the movie, but of that time period in New York, and, has a lot for everybody. And again, I really appreciate your time today, Glenn. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me on.
And again, that was author Glenn Frankel and his new book, Shooting Midnight Cowboy, Art, Sex, Loneliness, Liberation, and the Making of a Dark Classic, is out now.